In November 1620, an old 180-ton merchant ship named the Mayflower docked at Cape Cod. 41 free adult men signed a history-changing document on the deck, the Mayflower Compact. The short oath of organizing a civil community and formulating regulations was like a seed quietly planted in the soil of the North American continent. However, the true history is far more complex than the legend. At the very moment when this political document was signed, these pilgrims also signed a commercial agreement that has been forgotten by history. The total investment for the Mayflower's voyage was £1,200 to £1,600, which was equivalent to the income of an ordinary British worker for 60 to 80 years. This was an enormous expense beyond the imagination of ordinary people at that time. "We are pilgrims, not fugitives," wrote William Bradford of Plymouth Plantation. This sentence reveals that they were not just refugees pursuing religious freedom, but a group of shrewd business partners. William Bradford was born in Yorkshire, England in 1590, and became the second governor of the Plymouth colony. He had a famous saying, "Truth is infinite, and we can only see a part of it." It was this pragmatic leader who recorded the commercial truth behind this journey that was later glorified by future generations. This is not the starting point of American history, but it is the dual germination of the spirit of freedom and commercial genes. Before them, Indians had lived here for tens of thousands of years. After them, countless immigrants would come in pursuit of the same dream. Today, let's look back at that magnificent era and explore the other side of the origin of the United States of America. In the early 17th century, Britain began to immigrate to North America. Farmers who had lost their land, workers living in hardship, Puritans persecuted for their religious beliefs. They crossed the Atlantic Ocean with hope and despair and settled down on this new continent. Thomas Weston, a London merchant and representative of the Venture Capital Association, negotiated with the Puritans in 1620 and said,
"Nothing has been sent back from the ship. You really have a hard time."
His investment agreement defined the economic structure of the early colonies. From Jamestown in Virginia in 1607 to the establishment of Georgia, the last colony, in 1733, 13 British colonies gradually took shape on the east coast of North America. Their economies were diverse. The northern region was developed in industry and commerce, the central region was rich in grain, and the southern region had a prosperous plantation economy. Historical data shows that by 1750, the total population of the 13 colonies had reached 1.2 million, and the annual total economic output value was about £150 million. Some people would rather choose prisons in Britain than freedom under the harsh conditions in the Netherlands. Bradford's record reveals the severity of the economic predicament. However, after the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763, Britain's attitude towards the colonies changed dramatically. The land west of the Appalachian Mountains was declared the private property of the royal family, and the colonists were prohibited from touching it. The Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts followed one after another, imposing heavy taxes. No taxation without representation. The voices of the colonists grew louder and louder. In 1770, the world's shocking Boston Massacre occurred. Immediately after that, in 1773, the Boston Tea Party broke out. When more than 300 chests of tea were dumped into Boston Harbor, the balance of history had already tilted. Britain's intolerable acts came like snowflakes, closing Boston Harbor, revoking the autonomy of Massachusetts. The rift between the colonies and the suzerain state could no longer be repaired. But there is a neglected key point here. The Boston Tea Party was not just a political protest, but an economic resistance against the tea monopoly of the British East India Company. Historical data shows that at that time, the British East India Company controlled 90% of the tea trade in North America and made huge profits through monopoly prices. On the morning of April 19, 1775, an ordinary spring day, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay sent troops to search for the militia's arsenal. Near Lexington, outside Boston, a shot rang out through the sky. The shot heard round the world at Lexington, marking the official outbreak of the War of Independence. "This is not an ordinary rebellion but a revolution," Thomas Paine wrote in Common Sense. In May, the Second Continental Congress was held, and George Washington was appointed as the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Washington was not only a military leader but also a shrewd land speculator. Historical data shows that by 1775 he already owned about 50,000 acres of land, worth approximately $50,000. From the weak militia to the regular Continental Army, the people of North America began an arduous struggle for freedom. But behind this struggle were complex economic considerations. In 1775, the Continental Congress issued the first continental dollars in an attempt to solve the problem of military expenses, but this led to severe inflation. On July 4, 1776, history was frozen at that moment in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. The Declaration of Independence, drafted by Thomas Jefferson, solemnly proclaimed, "All men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." On this day, the 13 colonies formally broke away from Britain, and the United States of America was born. July 4th has since become America's Independence Day, the Battle of Saratoga, the Siege of Yorktown. After 8 years of bloody battles, on September 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and Britain formally recognized American independence. But this was not just an ordinary victory in a war, it was the birth ceremony of a new country, and a great success of a commercial venture investment. Historical data shows that between 1775 and 1783, the United States raised approximately $400 million in war funds by selling land, issuing bonds, and receiving foreign aid. Among them, France provided about $130 million in military aid, which played a decisive role in America's victory. Independence was just the beginning. The real challenge was how to build a new country. The loose alliance under the Articles of Confederation in 1777 could not effectively exercise state power. In 1783, America's national debt had reached $42 million, while the annual income of the federal government was only about $500,000. Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, designed America's early financial system and once said,
"National credit is the cornerstone of public prosperity."
His report on the public credit put forward in 1790 laid the foundation for America's financial system. In 1787, 55 representatives gathered in Philadelphia and began 4 months of secret discussions. That summer, in the Meeting Hall of Philadelphia, there were not only the collision of political wisdom, but also the game of commercial interests. When the U.S. Constitution was drafted in 1787, the total population of the 13 states was about 3 million. Finally, an epic-making constitution was born, a federal state with separation of powers and checks and balances. This constitution consists of a preamble and 7 articles. It is not perfect, but it is the wisest choice under the circumstances at that time. However, the commercial wisdom implied in this constitution is also of great importance. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states. Article 1, Section 8 authorizes Congress to fix the standard of weights and measures. Article 1, Section 10 prohibits states from entering into any treaty, alliance, or confederation. On March 4, 1789, the First Federal Congress of the United States declared that the Constitution of the United States of America officially came into effect. In the same year, George Washington was elected as the first President of the United States with a unanimous vote. This general who refused to be a king became the world's first head of state with the title of President. In 1790, Hamilton put forward the Report on the Public Credit, suggesting that the federal government assume the debts of the states, establish a national bank, and unify the currency system. This series of financial reforms transformed the United States from a new debt-ridden country into an economy with strong credit in a short time. From 13 colonies to 50 states, from a population of 3 million to 341 million, from the Atlantic coast to spanning 2 oceans, the rise of the United States can be called a miracle in world history. But the starting point of all this was those people who dared to fight for freedom and take risks for commerce. Just as the Declaration of Independence says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The American Revolution not only ended British colonial rule but also established a bourgeois democratic system, paving the way for the development of capitalism. Historical data shows, in 1790, America's GDP was approximately $198 million. In 1860, America's GDP increased to $4.1 billion. In 1900, America's GDP reached $20 billion, making it the world's largest economy. In 2024, America's GDP reached $29.18 trillion, setting a new historical high and ranking first in the world. The Declaration of Independence proclaims that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. America's development has always been accompanied by dual genes, the spirit of freedom and commercial adventure. From venture capital in the 17th century to innovation in modern Silicon Valley, from beaver fur trade to global capital flow, these genes have shaped the unique path of America's rise. Today, when we look back at this period of history, we can't help but think, what exactly does the origin of a country mean? Is it the sound of gunfire and the flames of war, or wisdom and compromise? Is it the desire for freedom, or commercial shrewdness? Is it lofty ideals, or pragmatic economic considerations? Perhaps the true answer lies in this. The greatness of the United States began with the desire for freedom, was achieved by adhering to the spirit of commerce, and has endured through the inheritance of institutional innovation. As historians have said, the United States is a national machine completely based on commerce, and the White House is just an extension of the overall business model. But this is not a derogatory term. It is an objective description of the founding genes of the United States. Understanding the dual genes of commerce and freedom in America's origin is not only to know where it came from, but also to think about where we are going. Just as Bradford said, we are pilgrims, not fugitives. In the balance between ideals and reality, every country can find its own path of rise.